Ring Around the Rosie. Ask most people about Ring Around the Rosie, and they'll tell you it's about the Black Death, the plague that swept through Europe beginning in 1347 and wiped out somewhere between 30 and 60% of the entire continent's population. The rosie is the ring-shaped rash that appeared on infected skin. The posies were small bundles of herbs and flowers people clutched to their noses to mask the overwhelming stench of mass death in the streets. Ashes refers to the bodies burned to stop the spread of disease, or in the British version, a tissue mimics the sneezing that signaled infection. Canned, we all fall down, needs no explanation when your neighbors are dying faster than they can be buried. It's a compelling story, and it's almost certainly wrong. Folklorist Peter Opie, one of the foremost authorities on nursery rhyme history, argued that the plague connection was invented in the 20th century and projected backwards. The rhyme doesn't appear in print until 1881, in Kate Greenaway's Mother Goose, which is over 500 years after the Black Death first ravaged Europe. No earlier written record of it exists, and oral traditions that old tend to leave traces. The truth is, we don't know what this rhyme originally meant, and that ambiguity is disturbing in its own right. What we do know is that generations of parents sang it cheerfully to small children, while the imagery it conjures, whether intentional or not, maps almost perfectly onto one of history's most catastrophic death events. London Bridge is falling down. London Bridge is falling down is one of the oldest rhymes in this list, with origins potentially stretching back over 1,000 years, and depending on which theory you believe, it references either a Viking military assault, a long history of catastrophic structural failures, or something far darker involving a child buried alive in the foundations. The bridge itself dates to Roman times, around 50 AD, and was destroyed and rebuilt so many times that the cheerful chorus about it falling down reads less like poetry and more like an accurate maintenance log. There were major collapses or destructions in 1014, 1091, and 1136, plus fires, floods, and sheer neglect across centuries. The most dramatic theory traces the rhyme to the Norse king Olaf II, who in 1014 allegedly tied ropes from his ships to the supports of London Bridge and rowed hard enough to tear the whole structure down, clearing the Thames for a military assault on the Danish forces holding London. Snorri Sturluson's sagas record this event, though historians debate the details. Then there's the immurement theory, the belief recorded across multiple cultures that a bridge needed a human sacrifice sealed inside its foundations to remain standing, and that the victim chosen was sometimes a child. Archaeological evidence for this practice in England is thin and disputed, but the folk belief was real enough that it embedded itself into songs and stories across medieval Europe. My Fair Lady is often attributed to Eleanor of Provence or Eleanor of Castile, both of whom held toll revenues from the bridge at various points, essentially making them its financial custodians. The rhyme, then, might be a compressed record of 1,000 years of catastrophe, political control, and possibly sacrifice, all wrapped into a skipping song. Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty is almost universally pictured as a cheerful egg sitting on a wall, but that interpretation comes entirely from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, published in 1871, and has nothing to do with the rhyme's origins. The egg is Carroll's invention. The leading historical theory, and it is a theory rather than a confirmed fact, places Humpty Dumpty not in a fairy tale, but in the English Civil War, specifically the Siege of Colchester in 1648. According to this account, Royalist forces defending Colchester mounted a large cannon on the wall of St. Mary's Church. Parliamentarian forces targeted the wall and brought it down, sending the cannon crashing to the ground below. The Royalists tried desperately to recover and reposition it, but a cannon that size, once broken and buried in rubble, was beyond repair. All the king's horses and all the king's men, quite literally, could not put it together again. The Siege of Colchester lasted 11 weeks, from June to August 1648, and ended with the garrison's surrender on August 28. The Royalist commanders were executed shortly after. The name Humpty Dumpty itself was also period slang for a clumsy, overweight person, and some historians suggest the rhyme may have been a satirical portrait of a specific political figure rather than a canon at all. Either way, the rhyme that has decorated children's bedroom walls for generations almost certainly began as a record of military defeat, broken machinery, and the execution of soldiers who fought on the losing side of a civil war. Jack and Jill. Jack and Jill fetching a pail of water sounds about as innocent as a nursery rhyme can get, until you look at the full original text, or dig into the economic history it may be referencing. One of the more credible theories connects the rhyme to King Charles I's attempts to reform liquid measures in the 17th century. Parliament blocked his efforts, and the practical result was a reduction in the legal sizes of a jack, which was a half-pint measure, and a gill, or gill, which was a quarter-pint. Consumers paid the same price and received less. The Crown and Parliament fought over liquid volume, and ordinary people were quietly robbed by legislation. Jack fell down, literally lost value, and Jill came tumbling after. A folk theory with older roots connects the names to the Norse mythological figures Hajuki and Bil, two children seized by the moon while drawing water, taken up to the sky as tribute. That connection appears in the Prose Edda and is one of the earliest known versions of the children taken by a celestial body motif in Northern European mythology. Then there's the extended original text, which most modern versions quietly drop. Later verses describe Jill being whipped for laughing at Jack's injury, adding a layer of casual cruelty that explains why those stanzas disappeared from the nursery version. The rhyme first appeared in print around 1765, in Mother Goose's Melody, but its oral history is likely much older. Broke his crown means the top of his skull. He cracked his head open on the way down. The cheerful melody does a lot of heavy lifting to distract from that fact. Mary, Mary, quite contrary. Mary, Mary, quite contrary is widely believed to be a portrait of Queen Mary I of England, who reigned from 1553 to 1558 and burned approximately 280 Protestants at the stake during her 5-year reign, which is how she earned the posthumous nickname Bloody Mary. The contrary in the rhyme refers to her systematic reversal of the Protestant Reformation. Her father Henry the Fayes and brother Edward VI had spent decades building. She restored Catholicism, reversed legislation, and executed anyone prominent enough to serve as a warning. How does your garden grow is interpreted not as a question about horticulture, but as a grim accounting of her growing graveyard. Silver bells and cockle shells has two main readings. The first is that they refer to instruments of torture, with silver bells being a slang term for thumbscrews, and cockle shells being a device used for genital torture, though both of these identifications are disputed and should be treated as theories rather than confirmed facts. The second reading is that they represent Catholic iconography, with bells used during Mass and cockle shells as traditional symbols of pilgrimage. Pretty maids all in a row, in this reading, becomes the executed Protestant martyrs lined up in death, a grim garden of the regime's making. The rhyme was first printed around 1744, almost 2 centuries after Mary's reign, which gives it time to have developed as coded political commentary after the fact. Whatever its precise origin, it translates the systematic state murder of hundreds of people into a light, lilting children's rhyme that has been sung in playgrounds ever since. Baba Black Sheep. Baba Black Sheep, first recorded in 1731, is one of the few nursery rhymes whose dark origin is economic rather than violent, though the economic reality it describes was genuinely oppressive for the people living through it. The most historically grounded theory connects it to the medieval English wool tax of 1275, introduced under King Edward I through a law known as the Customs of Assize. Wool was England's most valuable export at the time, with the country producing and exporting roughly 30,000 sacks annually by the 14th century, each sack weighing around 165 kilograms. The tax imposed on wool revenue was significant, and the rhyme's 3 bags divide the proceeds with uncomfortable clarity. One for the master, meaning the king, one for the dame, meaning the church, and one for the little boy who lives down the lane, the farmer who actually raised the sheep and did the work, receiving the smallest share last. It's a neat summary of feudal economics in 4 lines. The rhyme also became the center of a very modern controversy in the 1980s and 1990s, when some councils and nurseries in the United Kingdom reportedly considered modifying or banning it over concerns about racial connotations. Many of these reports were exaggerated or misrepresented in the press, and folklorists largely regard the racial reading as a modern projection onto older material. The phrase black sheep as a term for an outcast or disreputable member of a group predates any racial meaning and refers straightforwardly to the fact that black wool couldn't be dyed and was therefore worth less commercially. The rhyme is about exploitation. It always has been. Georgy Porgy. The Georgy Porgy is believed by many historians to be a portrait of George Villiers, 1st Duke of Buckingham, who rose from minor gentry to become the most powerful unelected man in England through his extraordinarily close relationship with King James I. James's letters to Villiers are a matter of historical record, and they contain language that goes well beyond what any employer would write to a subordinate, with James referring to Villiers as his sweet child and wife in correspondence. Villiers was notorious at court for sexual misconduct, with accusations of harassment and assault involving noble women who had little political recourse against someone so thoroughly protected by royal favor. Kissed the girls and made them cry maps cleanly onto those documented accusations. When the boys came out to play, Georgy Porgy ran away, reflects his consistent pattern of avoiding accountability, retreating behind royal protection whenever consequences threatened. He wasn't just personally corrupt. His foreign policy incompetence drove England into disastrous simultaneous wars with both France and Spain, costing enormous amounts of money and a significant number of lives. Public hatred for him was intense and documented. When soldier John Felton assassinated him on August 23, 1628, stabbing him at a Portsmouth inn, crowds in London reportedly celebrated in the streets. Felton himself was widely regarded as a hero before his execution. The rhyme that supposedly describes a boy who steals kisses and runs from consequences is, under this reading, actually a satirical summary of one of the most despised political figures of 17th-century England, a man whose arrogance and misconduct shaped the political crises that would eventually lead to the English Civil War. Sing a Song of Sixpence. Sing a Song of Sixpence, first recorded in 1744, has attracted more competing origin theories than almost any other rhyme on this list, ranging from pirate recruitment codes to royal court satire. The pirate theory, which claims 4 and 20 blackbirds represented sailors and the pie represented a ship, is cited endlessly online and has essentially no credible primary source evidence to support it. The more historically interesting theory connects the rhyme to Henry VI's dissolution of the monasteries, which ran from 1536 to 1541, and saw the king seize assets from over 800 religious institutions across England. The king counting his money reflects the enormous wealth transfer that dissolution represented. The queen eating honey in the parlor reflects the court's comfortable distance from the human cost of that seizure. The maid hanging out clothes and having her nose pecked off is linked by some historians to Anne Boleyn, who was executed on May 19, 1536, the same period in which the dissolutions accelerated. The birds baked in a pie has its own curious footnote. There are documented records of Renaissance banquets in which live birds were sewn inside pastry shells and released when the pie was cut open, serving as a theatrical entertainment for nobility. The practice was real, making the most bizarre image in the rhyme the one with the most concrete historical support. The line about a bird removing a woman's nose has no reading, symbolic or literal, that lands anywhere cheerful. It just sits there in the middle of a children's song, matter-of-fact and unexplained. Rock-a-bye Baby. Rock-a-bye Baby is the lullaby sung to children at bedtime, which makes its content, a baby falling out of a tree, cradle and all, crashing to the ground below, genuinely strange to consider when you slow down and pay attention to the words. The rhyme first appeared in print in 1765 in Mother Goose's Melody, and one annotation in that edition suggests it was written by a Pilgrim settler who observed Native American mothers hanging cradle boards from tree branches, allowing the natural movement of the wind to rock infants to sleep. If accurate, that would make this one of the few nursery rhymes with an indigenous American practice at its origin, though the observation was filtered entirely through a colonial perspective, with no recorded input from the culture being described. The more politically charged theory connects the falling baby to the Glorious Revolution of 1688. James II's son, James Francis Edward Stuart, was born on June 10, 1688, and his birth was immediately controversial. Protestant opponents of the Catholic king spread rumors that the child was not legitimate, that he had been smuggled into the royal bedchamber in a warming pan to produce a Catholic heir artificially. In this reading, the baby in the cradle represents the Stuart line, and down will come baby cradle and all, is a prediction or a wish that the whole dynasty would collapse, which it effectively did when William of Orange invaded later that year. The melody is soft and slow and designed to soothe. The words describe an infant in freefall. Oranges and lemons. Oranges and lemons is unusual because its dark content isn't hidden in interpretation or historical subtext. It's right there in the final lines, which are simply not taught to children anymore. The full version ends, "Here comes a candle to light you to bed, and here comes a chopper to chop off your head." The rhyme lists real London churches by the sounds of their bells, including St. Clement Danes, St. Martin's, the Old Bailey, Shoreditch, Stepney, and Bow, and each church carries its own history of proximity to death. The Old Bailey sits adjacent to where Newgate Prison stood, and public hangings outside Newgate continued until 1868, drawing enormous crowds. St. Sepulchre's bell was traditionally rung the night before an execution, and the condemned would hear it from their cell. St. Clement Danes's crypt was used to store plague victims during the Great Plague of London in 1665 and 1666, when the city lost roughly 100,000 people. The children's game that accompanies the rhyme involves two children forming an arch with their arms and catching a child underneath it when the song reaches its conclusion, trapping them. The caught child is out. It is, when you describe it plainly, a game that reenacts the random chance of who the executioner takes next, played by 6-year-olds in a circle. Newgate Prison was demolished in 1904, but the chopper remains in the song, waiting at the end of the verse every time. Three Blind Mice. Three Blind Mice is one of the oldest nursery rhymes with a confirmed print date, appearing in Thomas Ravenscroft's Deuteromelia in 1609, making it over 400 years old. The three blind mice are commonly said to represent three Protestant noblemen burned at the stake under Queen Mary I, Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley, burned together on October 16, 1555, and Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, burned on March 21, 1556. The farmer's wife in this reading is Mary herself. She cut off their tails with a carving knife, represents the executions, and blind refers to their supposed inability or unwillingness to see the truth of Catholicism as Mary defined it. Cranmer's execution is one of the most dramatic in English history. He had recanted his Protestantism under pressure, then at the moment of his burning, thrust the hand that signed the recantation into the flames first, declaring it should be punished for its weakness. The rhyme's attribution to this event has a significant problem, however, which is the 50-year gap between the executions in 1555 and 1556, and the first printed appearance of the rhyme in 1609. That's a long oral tradition to trace with any confidence, and no contemporary source connects the rhyme to Mary's reign directly. The attribution may be accurate, or it may be a later historical overlay applied to older material. What can be said with certainty is that 3 people were publicly burned alive, that a farmer's wife appears in the song removing body parts with a knife, and that historians have been arguing about the connection ever since. Little Jack Horner. Little Jack Horner sits in the corner eating his Christmas pie, pulls out a plum, and declares himself a good boy. And according to one of the more specific and traceable theories in this list, what he actually pulled out was the deed to a stolen manor house while his employer was being executed on a hill nearby. The theory centers on Thomas Horner, a steward who served Abbot Richard Whiting of Glastonbury during Henry V's dissolution of the monasteries. The story goes that Abbot Whiting, desperate to preserve Glastonbury Abbey from dissolution, sent Horner to London carrying a pie that concealed the title deeds to 12 Somerset manors, intended as a bribe for the king. Horner allegedly helped himself to one of the deeds during the journey, specifically the deed to the Manor of Mells. The Horner family did acquire Mells Manor around this period, and their descendants lived there for centuries, which is circumstantial but striking. Abbot Whiting's fate was not improved by any of this. He was arrested, convicted of treason, and on November 15, 1539, hanged, drawn, and quartered on Glastonbury Tor, the hill that rises above the town, so that his death would be visible across the surrounding landscape as a warning. The Horner family have consistently denied the theft story, maintaining the land was legitimately purchased, and no contemporary document confirms the pie account. But the rhyme remains, with its chorus of self-congratulation, "What a good boy am I," sung while the man whose property may have been stolen was dying on a hill a few miles away. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.